Being a child of the 70s and growing up in the 80s, the Cold War was an inevitable part of life. Different TV series, movies, miniseries, The Day After, you name it, things that were mind-numbingly terrifying about nuclear Armageddon and or the aftermath, the possibility of war. Although I think the most likely scenario to our mind was that the Cold War would just keep going as a Cold War well beyond our lifetime. I did not expect to live to see the Cold War end unless it ended with nuclear Armageddon. In the midst of this, we have one of the classic American films, 1984, Patrick Swayze, Jennifer Grey, Leah Thompson, Charlie Sheen. This is Red Dawn. Oh, and Powers Booth. I couldn't possibly leave out the great Powers Booth, who's been in a ton of stuff, even Tombstone and Attila the Hun. Red Dawn, 1984. So the Soviet Union, with its allies in Nicaragua, Cuba, elsewhere, decide that they will invade the United States in a land invasion. They preemptively attack our nuclear ICBM launch points out west. They send in Soviet troops to Alaska. Their South American allies come up. They use commercial passenger jets to then drop paratroopers behind our lines. They disguise South American guerrillas and soldiers as migrant workers crossing illegally into the United States, who then attack some of our western and southern bases. It's an extraordinarily plausible way that they might have gone about such a thing. The United States then nukes the location near Alaska to stop the Soviet troops from being able to pour in, and a big land war begins to take place, spread across the western United States. A lot of folks comment about this movie, how unrealistic it is. I don't think it's unrealistic at all. We still have the issue with the southern border. People call you an Izumarki obiist or whatever, throw labels at you. But the fact that anybody that remotely looks like they could be from there could cross that border anytime and carry terrorist weapons or whatever. The idea that Nicaraguan or Cuban troops could be sent in plain clothes across there in number is completely plausible to this day. The idea that they would want to conquer us, the Soviets, rather than just obliterate us, so they figure out how to get their people on our soil, because we will then fight the conventional war. You're not going to keep dropping nukes on your own soil that you're hoping to liberate. I think the only thing about the scenario we're given that's hard to make sense of is that America does not retaliate en masse against the Soviet Union, where we have no troops on the ground that we're told about. There's none of our people in theater to nuke there. Now, they took out our western launch points, but we've still got submarine-mounted weapons. We got weapons in Europe. Even with the Europeans not coming into the war on our behalf, we had bases there. We certainly could have launched even if we had to do it right before the Europeans made us quit and withdraw. So it doesn't make much sense. It would have made more sense and been a help to the plot had we immediately sent our Western European forces into the Soviet Union. That would make sense then of why we didn't want to nuke. They'd have the two theaters of conventional war ongoing. Other than that, I think the movie Red Dawn does an incredible job of depicting not really just how that could happen, but the American response. We get the solid American out west, people that know how to hunt deer, live off the land, have guns, and know they've been taught. We get the two boys, the oldest boys in the group, were taught by their dad how to survive. They know how to do the guerrilla tactics, and they learn as they go. So the Soviet and their allies come to town. The young people end up being able to escape to the woods. They collect more young people, and as they continue to raid these guerrilla attacks, they get more and more equipment, do more and more damage. Really, what Red Dawn does really well is it captures the realism of that. Now, how long could they really hold out? How realistic is that? That's hard to say, and that really goes down to what would the enemy be willing to do? Are they going to carpet bomb the whole woods in a place that they conquered partly because of its natural resources and its availability. I mean, what would they do? Set the forest on fire. There are ways to hunt down the kids. Do they want to do it the ways that are available to them? And what we see, that they're tactically trying to capture them or kill them in a much more precise surgical sort of fashion. Whether that's realistic or not, what is fabulous is the depiction that we get of what the kids go through, having to be forced now to sudden adulthood, taking out revenge against the enemy, but also patriotism, homeland. We get the details of killing and what it is like for them to have to kill, how they become accustomed to killing. We get their suffering when one of them is killed. We get to see there's a lot of existential terror that is sort of overlooked in this film that is captured very, very well, when the crowds that discuss it online tend to be either, well, that's stupid and implausible, or this is great flag waving stuff, yay. And I lean more towards this is great flag waving stuff, but the realism with which they depicted how hard it was, how it's not portrayed as an easy, simple thing, kill them because they're the bad guys, communists aren't human, whatever. It is much more complicated than that. And when they do have them and they have to kill them up close and personal, how that is a transition in the lives of these young people to become that ruthless. And ultimately, having to kill one of their own for being a traitor. This is a great, great moment. The one who's been sort of back and forth all along and a little bit weak, whose dad is the mayor, turns out he snuck into town to see dad. They captured him, made him swallow a tracking device and go back. That they would kill a Russian prisoner and their friend. And the way that is all played out with Patrick Swayze, the leader, he wants to do it so bad. He knows that he should do it rather, but he can't bring himself to do it. And someone else does it. One of the other guys shoots him. And wow, being willing to execute someone for being a traitor just like that. Charlie Sheen asked the question, that scene, right? How are we any different from them? Well, because we live here, Patrick Swayze says. In fact, if I had any complaint about the movie, it would be that there are a couple of threads that I felt weren't explored enough. Like maybe the script got reduced or the scenes got cut. But we get out of nowhere that discussion, how are we any different from them? And I think the question is answered. But given that some of the members of the group of rebels were a little bit more hesitant early on, it feels like that needed an earlier conversation, and it needed then to be finally at the execution of the traitor that everyone sort of reaches this resolve of, yeah, this is why we're different than them. And we do live here. This is our home. It would have been nice to see that. It didn't need to be like a sobby, long movie all about what's the difference between us. But it would have been cool to have that conversation once before and kind of have it as in principle, an idea that comes to better fruition. It's kind of just suddenly pops in there. And by the time Sheen asks the question, you don't get the idea that he's really been the one agonizing with it. It's been the traitor who'd been agonizing with it. Maybe he should have asked it at that turning point. But it just felt like there was something that had been cut and was missing, or it wasn't just wasn't fleshed out quite well enough. The other thing being Ernesto Bella, the Cuban commander, and his interaction with the Russian on scene. He's the guy that we get a multi-dimensional bad guy in. He clearly is not real keen on how they're handling certain situations. He's not real happy with the tactics. We get more about him than we do any of the other antagonists, which is a nice thing for the story because you don't want it to be too simplistic. It isn't Rocky and Bullwinkle. They're not Russian agents. Giving a more human side to the character. And I like his little arc. We get the long letter he sends back to his wife. And then finally, he cannot bring himself to shoot the wounded men at the end. He lets them, knowing that it's over, he lets them go off and die. I felt like, though, he wasn't fleshed out quite as well as he could have been, or something was cut. Because though he is sort of the consistent antagonist that clearly has doubts, it would have been nice if we'd seen him write a letter earlier. Like if he'd written a letter to his wife and we heard it in his voice where he was starting to, like, oh, I'm so happy, the revolution, it's glorious, but gosh, it's a little bit messy. It would have been nice to see more of that transition expressed than what we got. But still, it worked well enough that it was in there, but it could have been fleshed out more. Red Dawn overall is an incredible story, and it's amazing. I've watched it several times over the years, and I still kind of have, oddly enough, I think of it as 1984 when things were simpler, good guy, bad guy thing. And so every time I watch it, it reminds me, somehow I manage to be re-surprised at the complexity that's in the film, because the things that I remember about it most are all the simple patriotic moments that we loved in 1984 because I was a kid. But every time I watch it, somehow I'm always like, wow, this is a better movie than I thought it was. They really do some amazing acting. I mean, Leah Thompson, who I've enjoyed in comedies and everything else over the years, she doesn't get enough credit for we clearly see that she was assaulted. It's suggested, but we see her reaction to it. And then how, in a time now where every show has to have an empowered woman, Leah Thompson was badass in this movie when she gets to grips with her trauma and is manning the big machine gun. And again, they don't have her doing anything unrealistic like using judo chops on these communists, but she's got the big machine gun and she's able to look at them and gun them down without blinking because she's gone through this story arc. And many of the young people in the group, they start out very well, like high school kids. Patrick Swayze's the smartest of them, but throughout the film, they become increasingly hardened by war and circumstance. And boy, is it ever come out well on film, and some of them portray it so well. Leah Thompson should have got some sort of award for that. I'll have to Google it, maybe she did. But you can find it lots of places online. Find it, check it out. Go back in time with me to the Cold War in 1984 and gun down some communists. Let me know what you think. Red Dawn.